Welcome back to another episode of Higher Ground, where we are actually asking the question today: are employers making hiring harder than it needs to be? And joining me today is my colleague Sarah van der Walt. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Nix. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yay, thank you. So, a little bit of background on Sarah. She has an LLB degree from the University of Stellenbosch. She started her career in the education sector as a law educator for Boston City campus. And a few years later, she was introduced to our CEO, Rob Mailage, and decided to take the leap of faith and join the recruitment industry. She has loved it from the start. She's truly a people's person and has been with the group for about almost 7 years now, and very much a generalist, focusing on all areas of specialization across different industries. And yes, so Sarah, thank you so much for being here today, and I'm excited to just dive straight into it. So I wanted to. This is a really lovely question. So, why are good candidates saying no? And we're referring to job opportunities, offers, etc. So, Sarah, do you think employers are underestimating what candidates want beyond the salary?
Thank you, Nix. I also really love this question, and I feel like I could go on and on about it. So I'll try to keep my answer quite short. But definitely, employers they're really underestimating what candidates want beyond salary. They need to think wider and broader. I mean, they think that a drawn out interview process that if they have a good offer for a candidate, then that will make them accept it. And they are flawed in that thinking because there's so much more that employees or future potential employees look for, and which is just giving them a good interview process. And I think that that's the main thing that
A
is
great
overlooked.
candidate experience can go so far. And I think that's something that employers definitely underestimate. But I love that. I think it is about culture and flexibility and the growth opportunities that a company can offer. And Sarah, what are some of the biggest reasons candidates are actually declining offers today?
There's actually many reasons candidates decline offers today.
Mm,
And I touched on this in the first question, but a long and a drawn out interview process.
yeah.
If a company comes in with an under offer, that's also negatively going to impact their chances of it being accepted.
Hmm.
Candidates also, they're in many interview processes, and companies often forget this piece. They're actually competing with other companies. Candidates don't just have one. Often the tech candidates are weighing up like three offers at a time.
Correct.
And sometimes our clients get upset with us when we say they have other options, but that is the reality.
Yeah.
Um, I actually recently had an incident where a candidate didn't actually want to interview. She got an interview, she was excited, and then she started speaking to her, whether it's her family or someone in her network or a friend, and she actually heard that that specific area in the company has a toxic culture. And she said to me, "You know what, Sarah, I'm actually not going to continue." So there's many things that companies need to consider. And yeah, they really need to focus on their branding or their employer value proposition.
Yeah, I think that's really, really spot on, Sarah. I think there's a lot of factors that come into why a candidate would decline an offer, but I think those are some really good examples. And it starts from day one all the way up until the end. That entire process is so key to that candidate accepting that opportunity. So, and I mean, in terms of flexibility, do you think that's still a deal breaker today? Are a lot of candidates still looking for that?
Mm. So this is a good question because the answer is actually yes and no. So for tech candidates, so like data engineers or developers, for example, it very much still is a deal breaker. Often finance, marketing, whatever it may be, broader industries, they realize that there is a big drive towards being back full time in the office, and they're actually okay with it. I recently had a candidate who was going to have to drive pretty far every day to get to the offices. But when he realized the company was going to offer a petrol card, he was fully okay with it. So sometimes it's not about being lazy, but it's just about the traveling expenses. So yeah, it's really yes and no to answer your question.
Yeah, 100%. I think it really just depends on the individual and the specialization or the skill set and also their current circumstances. I think that also
Mm.
plays a big part.
Yes.
And I mean, if you could give employers one piece of advice for making their next offer harder to refuse or harder to resist, what is it that you would share with them?
One piece of advice. Okay, so a great interview experience, always,
Yeah,
always, always, always key. And also, I'll just give two. Making your first offer an attractive offer. We can just say that's
correct.
one. But for example, a 5% increase is not going to get your candidate excited. You need to look at least 10 to 15% to really get their interest and engagement. I know we've had a situation in the past where a candidate was offered and he declined it, and then the company went higher. And he actually came back to say, you know what, if their first offer was not going to be their best offer, then I'm actually no longer interested in working for a company that's going to try get me at a a rate that I could, I am more deserving of a higher offer.
Exactly, exactly. That's why that first attempt is obviously incredibly key.
Mm.
So yeah, that's definitely some good advice for employers out there is really that interview experience, that level of engagement, and that first offer just being really fantastic. It needs to align and it needs to match the candidate's expectations. And I think that just goes down to communication throughout the process, no surprises. So there isn't that back and forth and delaying of the process. And because we're talking about offers and even things like the counter offer conundrum, right? Do you take it or do you walk away? There's some really interesting things around this particular space. And I know that there were some questions that maybe you wanted to ask me as well, Sarah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Nix. So, I mean, from your perspective, why are companies making more counter offers at the moment? Do you have any insight into that?
I just feel at the moment, companies are working really hard to retain their talent because it's very difficult to find great people in the market. And we're not just talking about skills, we are talking about
Mm.
attitude, mindset, work ethic. These things are hard to replace. I mean, you can find skills in the market, but it's also the individual at the end of the day that makes a big
Mhm.
impact on delivery and performance and culture within the organization. So, that for me, I believe companies are holding on really tight because, again, it could lead to to replace that individual can take them 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And Sarah, I know you've had some processes yourself where they've gone on for almost a year to replace that individual. So I do
Mm.
believe there are companies out there that are doing whatever it takes to retain their talent and to avoid spending that extra cost because sometimes it is going to cost you more to replace those individuals. So yeah, I mean that's a great question, Sarah. And I mean, why do you think candidates accept counter offers? What's your perspective on that?
Mhm. So the main reason I would say at the moment is purely financial. I mean,
Mm,
a lot of families are in a tight spot at the moment. I mean, we all know that the economy in South Africa is not where it should be, and I think that it becomes very easy for a candidate to, accept a counter offer when it's an environment they know they're not going to have to adapt and change,
true.
and it's more money. So, I mean, I've even had an instance where the candidate was given 40%, an increase of that amount to stay. And you almost like, you almost understand it, at 40% is huge for their family, but it's never actually going to solve the problem. So I think that's the key thing. And when I say the problem, I mean the reason for them wanting to leave. More money is
That's correct.
never going to solve that problem. But I think the main reason at the moment is definitely just, the financial pressure that a lot of South Africans face.
Definitely, definitely. And it's coming up more and more. I mean, even the petrol conversation, right, comes up more
Mhm.
and more. Like, are they traveling less? Are they traveling more? Are they going into the office more days in the week, etc.? And that all impacts their net at the end of the day. And I mean, Sarah, what is the biggest mistake candidates make when they do receive a counter offer?
Mm. I think the biggest mistake is just that it's really thinking short term. They're so stuck in
Mm,
that short term view. And in that moment, it makes sense. But 3 months later, 6 months later, they come back to us and they realize that they've made that mistake, and then it's too late. I mean, the company has moved on, they've made another hire. And I think another mistake is it's also broken the trust with their
Yeah.
current employer. I mean, the current employer now knows, they're actively looking. And I think once you have resigned and taken account of it, the trust is broken. It's never going to be the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, there's always that perspective to think about, most definitely. But you never want to just, that feeling of saying to yourself, what if and what else is out there? And am I destined for more? Am I meant to be doing bigger things? And we can only dust that under the carpet for a certain amount of time until it comes up again for us. And we really start questioning, did I make the right decision? And where would I have been if I had accepted that offer at the end of the day? So these are some
Exactly.
really interesting things that people need to digest and unpack and decide, in terms of the future of their career. And I just want to touch on like what candidates are really looking for in 2026. I know we're already halfway through 2026, which is unbelievable.
More
But do you
than.
think but do you think salary has become less important than what it used to be?
That's an interesting question, Nix. I think salary is always going to be important.
Mm,
No matter which year it is, even if the economy is not bad, it's still going to be important. But there are other things that candidates are taking into account, and perhaps more so than before. So a good culture, leadership, work-life balance. Those are just some
mm,
other things that are being considered. Um, And I think to answer your question, candidates are looking at considering similar packages instead of just looking for that 15 to 20% increase. So yeah, so if some of the other things are there, like good culture, promotion, study opportunities, then they definitely would consider a similar package.
yeah. And I think that just goes back to what we spoke about. It really depends on the candidate situation. Like as an
Mm,
example, if your company is retrenching or restructuring and letting go of people, and there's new leadership and the company's been bought over, there's all these other things that are not within your control, that you think to yourself, well, you know what, if I could get the same package in a different company that gives me the right culture and the right leadership and the growth that I'm looking for, then I would definitely consider that. So I think again, the salary question really pops up based on what the situation is. And I mean, how important is career progression and learning for people who are
mm,
in the market?
mm. It's always going to be very, very, very important. And I think especially now in the new world of AI, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to really keep up to date with technology, with learning, with trainings, with certifications, and also conferences.
Hmm.
I think that candidates, they should be open to doing these cool things. And it's a different day, in your work life. And to keep up to date, yeah, it just really goes a long way. And as I say, especially now, I mean, AI is changing so much. So people have got to keep up to date.
Yeah, and I mean you've got to upskill your staff. You've got to upskill and move with the changes and evolve as a business. And I think the only way to do that is to provide the necessary training to help
Mhm.
individuals, move with the changes at the end of the day. And I think also as a brand and a company, you've got to keep up with that and remain relevant.
And this really comes back to your employer value proposition. So,
Mm,
how does a company sell themselves? What are they
mm,
doing that perhaps other companies aren't doing?
yeah,
What gives that candidate the feeling like, yes, like this is the company. And when they look at that offer, they just know that the experience that they have had to date. Maybe it was the hiring manager phoning them when before the
mm,
offer was made. That is,
yeah,
I mean, that for me is very special because imagine getting a call from the hiring manager and not just the HR contact or the recruiter. I mean, that is a huge sell. So it's
yeah,
really things like that. And yeah, I mean, if companies do these things, then they've got a greater chance of securing that person. I
yeah.
actually had a candidate ask me. She said I was made an offer, but I was just emailed and no one contacted me, and it felt very impersonal. And that's
Mm.
become the norm, unfortunately. But I think if that little piece could change, it would really make a big difference.
Absolutely. I feel like that's the the golden moment there is a personalized, warm, high touch sort of experience, and not
Mhm.
feeling like just another number at the end of the day. Like, they chose you. They want you to be a part of their company, and to make you feel really special from start to finish. Absolutely. So EVP is definitely very important. But thank you, Sarah. I really do appreciate your valuable time, and I think it's so great to share these market insights with candidates, with employers, and whoever's just thinking about, who has actually experienced some of these frustrations in the
Mm.
market, and they're not the only one. And it is about pushing forward and finding the right opportunity for yourself. Whatever feels good and feels right, definitely chase that. And yes, I mean, obviously, if you guys want to connect with Sarah, you can find her on LinkedIn. We'll also put her details below here in the caption. But thank you so much for joining us, and we will
Mhm.
see you on the next one. Bye.
Thank you, Nix. Bye.